Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TradCast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. Today is episode number 22, and on today's show, I'm going to be discussing some insights I have for filming your own hunts. This is going to be a good show. Let's jump right into it. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the TradCast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. And this show is for the last week of May 2015. And this week on the podcast, I just wanted to point out, I know last week at the end of the show, I told you that I was hoping to have a guest interview this week. Due to my work schedule and some conflicts there that I didn't see coming, and some other difficulties, that didn't happen. I wasn't able to get you guys a guest interview this week. I am in communication with some other people right now, so hopefully we'll get some more guest interviews coming here in the next few weeks. But in the meantime, I wanted to take the opportunity on this week's show to tell you guys a little bit, to give you guys an update on some things that I've been doing here on my properties in northern New York and some things that have been going on with me. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about a few of the other podcasts, outdoor podcasts that I'm enjoying that I think everybody else will enjoy and benefit from. So I want to point out a few of those here on this week's show. And then I also want to talk with you and just give you guys some insights on some things that I've learned over the last several years when it comes to filming your own hunts. Let's jump right into this week's show. All right, guys. Now, like I mentioned, I wanted to give you guys a quick update on some things that I've been doing here. This past weekend, I did a lot of work in my food plots again, and that came in the way of mowing. And I've touched on it a few other times so far, and a few other podcasts here the last few weeks. But for anybody who may not be familiar or who may be just tuning in to the podcast here for the first time, I've been doing food plots on my properties now for the last 3 or 4 years, and the last couple of years very intensely doing food plots. And last year I had a mixture of, perennial food plots and clover and annual food plots. And with having my food plots kind of broken up half and half, annuals and perennials, I didn't have to invest as much time into mowing last year because I didn't have as many acres planted into clover. But this year here, I've actually planted all of my food plots into clover, so I've kind of doubled my mowing. And I limed and fertilized this spring a few weeks ago, and with the recent rains we've had here, my food plots have been absolutely growing like wildfire. And so even though it's only been mid-May, I've had to get in there to several of my food plots now and do a mowing. And the reason why I felt that was so important to do here mid-May is because in a lot of these clover food plots that I have, I was starting to see, some weed and grass competition, primarily from the winter ryegrass that I threw down last August, on top of these food plots as a cover crop. Every fall, I throw down some winter rye seed on top of my clover plots. This way here, it helps reduce the browse pressure on your clover, late fall, just before that snow comes, when those deer are really in there hammering your food plots. If you've got some winter rye in it, I find it helps keep the browse pressure down on your clover, which will help your clover get a little bit better jump the following year. But of course, the one downside to doing that is the next spring, that winter ryegrass is going to come back and going to grow very, very aggressively early spring, and it's going to outcompete your clover in a good number of instances, and that's been the case on my food plots. And what happened is I actually had my winter rye was growing, and it was 4, 5, even 6 inches taller than the clovers were, and I wanted to get that winter rye knocked back, at least even with the clover, so that winter ryegrass wouldn't be, over competing my clover and choking out the clover. So this past week I went in to a couple of my food plots, actually 3 big food plots and a big long 5 to 600 yard long, I call it a clover lane. It's basically just a wood road, a logging road that runs through the woods, and I've got that seeded down to clover, and that lane is probably, I would say, anywhere from 5 to 600 yards long, so that's a lot of mowing on that trail itself. So I basically designated my entire day last Saturday. I was in there with my Stihl FS130 handheld weed trimmer, and I did the entire clover lane, that logging road, because there's a lot of stones and just some things I don't really want to run over with a garden tractor. So I actually use my weed whacker on that lane, but of course it takes me a couple 2.5 hours to do that, because it's a lot of mowing when you're mowing by hand. And then of course I did another one of the food plots by hand with the weed whacker, with my Stihl weed whacker, and it works. It does work. It does a great job, but boy, it's a lot of work. And a couple of weeks ago, I knew I was going to have a lot of clover to mow this year, because I was going to be putting most of my food plots into clover. So I knew that I was going to have to come up with another method, another way to mow, at least my bigger food plots that I can get to easier, that don't have as many stones and stumps in them. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do, and I was deliberating as to whether or not I was going to get, one of the DR walk behind power, field and brush mowers. And I was thinking about it, and I thought, you know what? I needed a new lawnmower anyways here for the house. And, the lawnmower I had was getting very old, had a bunch of things wrong with it. And I was going to have to invest, $300, $400, $500 into getting that running in top order this spring. And I was thinking, and I said, you know what? I'm going to try to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. And I actually picked up a new garden tractor here for the house. I got the Cub Cadet XT2, just a little 46-inch cut, garden tractor that you'd use at your house. And I bought that with the intention of using it on a couple of my larger food plots, because it was just going to be way too much work to try to mow all of my food plots with the weed whacker. I mean, between all of my food plots, I don't have exact measurements, but I've got to be mowing now, I would say, anywhere from 3 to 4 acres, maybe even a little more. And that's a lot to do by hand, especially when you've got to do that every, 3rd week or so, at least once a month. So I went ahead, purchased the garden tractor, and I used that last Sunday on a couple of my other food plots, and it worked absolutely fantastically. I leave the mower deck way up as high as it'll go at the very top setting, and it does an absolutely great job at mowing food plots where you don't have a lot of stones and a lot of stumps to compete with. And I was able to get as much mowing done in about a quarter of the time that it would have taken me by hand to mow those other food plots. So I'm very happy with how my Cub Cadet garden tractor is really going to help me out this summer for mowing my clover plots. I'm still going to use my Stihl FS130 weed trimmer on the more difficult to get to, smaller little hidey hole food plots that are, farther back into the woods, and I just can't get equipment back there, or in the places where it's really stony and, stumpy, and just places where you don't want to risk, damaging my garden tractor. But on my larger food plots, which are pretty much, removed of all major stones and stumps, I'm gonna get the Cub Cadet garden tractor in there, and that's gonna do a great job for mowing my food plots and really, lowering the workload that I have to do when it comes to mowing. And so that's just a little tip for anybody that wants to mow their food plots, thinking of a new way to mow your food plots. You can even use something as simple as a garden tractor, and as long as you leave that mower deck way up to the top setting, it should do a great job for you, as long as you don't have many stones or stumps to deal with. So I wanted to give you guys a quick update on that. Okay, and I just wanted to give you guys another update on some shooting. Now, of course I've been shooting my traditional bows here every day, as always, just continuing to try to work on my shooting, trying to become the best shot I can, because I'm trying to get ready for hunting season, obviously. I'm going to be shooting all summer. Now, actually, earlier tonight, I was shooting my bow earlier tonight, and I was practicing. I want to go with, because I do plan on filming my hunts this year, and I wanted to see how the Lumenoks, how the lighted noks work with my traditional bows. And tonight I actually took some old Lumenoks that I had for my compound arrows, and I put those on my gold tip traditional arrows tonight. And I tell you what, those Lumenoks were flying awesome out of my bow. In fact, I think they were flying even better than the noks that came on the arrows. So I'm very encouraged about that. And there's some obvious benefits to shooting the Lumenoks or any lighted nok. And one particular example is during my shooting tonight, I missed the deer target, and I thought I'd lost an arrow. Of course, it was still relatively daylight when I was shooting, and I could not find my arrow for nothing. I took about 15 laps, around the lawn where I thought the arrow had gone, and I couldn't find it. And I thought, you know what? I had my Lumenok on there. I saw that it was lighted up when it hit the ground. So that arrow's got to be here somewhere. It can't be completely buried in the dirt. And I waited until dark, and I went out at pitch dark, and it took me 3 seconds to find that arrow. And it was way down, wedged way down into the grass. I mean, so low, I just couldn't see it with my naked eye, looking for for just the very small knock, and even my white feathers. I'm shooting white feathers, and I still could not see that arrow. But literally 3 seconds at dark with the Lumenok, found my arrow, and that just saved me a carbon arrow. So having that Lumenok can help you in that way. And they're also a great training aid because, as we all know, when you're shooting traditional archery, traditional bows, your mind and your eyes and your brain is cluing in on that arrow flight and those flight characteristics. And having the lighted nok is just another way to increase the visibility of that arrow, which should help you in helping your mind and your brain adjust to the arc of the arrow from your bow, and it should help with your accuracy and improve your shooting. And of course, it's also going to be a benefit for anybody who wants to get into filming their hunts, because the camera obviously just does a good job of picking up the flight of that lighted nok, and it helps add a level of a dynamic level to your video. So that's why I wanted to get in to start shooting the Lumenoks. I wanted to start practicing with them, and the Lumenoks are flying really good from my setup. I'm going to be doing a video hopefully this weekend on my next few days off. Hopefully I can do a little low light shooting video with the Lumenoks, show you guys how that's doing, how those are working out. I think you guys will be really impressed with how those Lumenoks work, and I'm looking forward to bringing you guys a video on that. Now, with that being said, in this past week, I've uploaded a couple of new videos onto my YouTube channel, the Vantage Point Outdoors YouTube channel, and I did some slow motion shooting, and there's a couple of reasons why I did that. First of all, I wanted to do the video for the YouTube channel to update the channel and give you guys some cool videos to watch. But I also wanted to do that so that I could study my own shot form and how the arrows are flying out of my bow. And you know what? I made that video shooting my Jerboden whip, and I have pretty decent arrow flight, honestly. But when you slow that video, when you shoot those videos and you slow that down in editing, and you put that video, slow that down to 10-15%, you really get a good look at how your arrow is flying. And I noticed that I was shooting a little bit nock high, that my arrows were leaving nock high from the bow, and so I've made a slight adjustment to my string nock, and it seems to have rectified the problem. So, and I also got some feedback on that. Another great thing about doing YouTube videos is the fact that other people in the archery community, they'll give you feedback that'll help you out. And I actually got some feedback from Jason Samkoviak over at the Traditional Bow Hunting and Wilderness podcast. Of course, anybody who listens to Jason's podcast, he does a great job with his podcast and is very knowledgeable about all facets of traditional shooting. And Jason was actually kind enough to comment on my video and point out some things that he noticed, including that my arrows did look to be shooting a little bit nock high. So I got that problem rectified, not only from doing the video and then visually studying that video by slowing the shots down, but also by getting feedback from other archers within the community. So for anybody out there who wants to study their own shot form, or maybe really get a good look at how the arrows are leaving your bow, because sometimes it's very difficult to tell, at real speed. It's hard to see that a lot of times. When you shoot a video of it and you slow it down, you really get a great look at how your arrows are flying, and it can help you make some fine-tuned adjustments to your arrows, which will just help you be all the more accurate. Okay, guys, and that's pretty much all I had for updates. I'm gonna get back into the woods this weekend here on my next few days off. I'm gonna be checking some trail cameras on my food plots, and hopefully making a few other videos that I'll be putting onto the YouTube channel. So anybody who follows the YouTube channel, be on the lookout for some new videos, hopefully. Now, I also wanted to give you guys just a brief explanation and just talk to you a little bit about a few other outdoor podcasts that I'm enjoying, that I listen to every week, that I'm learning from, that I think everybody else could learn from. And I wanted to take the time to point these out to you. And again, I got the idea to do this segment from the Traditional Bow Hunting and Wilderness podcast from this past week. I was listening to Jason's show, and he actually did a little segment about this on his podcast, and I really enjoyed that segment. And I thought, you know what? I want to take the time to do that this week here on this podcast, so that anybody listening might be able to learn about these podcasts and hopefully start listening to them. And I think they'll help you out if you start listening. And I would certainly recommend you do that. Now, the first one I want to point out, obviously, is the Traditional Bow Hunting and Wilderness podcast. Jason Samkoviak does an awesome job with his podcast. And I'm not going to kid you, it is without question my favorite traditional bow hunting podcast that I listen to. I pretty much listen to every podcast that Jason puts out. And I've even tried to go back and listen to, all the past episodes that he's got out. And I think Jason's up to episode number 116, I think he's at now. So Jason is obviously very committed to his podcast, does one every week, and he touches on pretty much every possible aspect of traditional bow hunting, traditional shooting, how to be accurate, just every topic you can think about in traditional archery. Jason's probably got a podcast on it, and he does podcasts on wilderness camping, on just all kinds of outdoor topics. I really cannot recommend Jason's podcast enough. I really think that you would really enjoy it if you started listening to it. So anybody out there listening tonight who does listen to that podcast, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And for anybody who hasn't checked out the Traditional Bow Hunting and Wilderness podcast, I would certainly recommend doing that. I will leave a link in the show notes here of the show tonight to Jason's podcast. You can find him over at tbwpodcast.com. So I would highly recommend everybody checking out Jason's podcast. Okay, and now the second podcast that I wanted to let everybody know about, it's one that I listen to, really enjoy the podcast, and that is the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast. As the name describes, it's primarily a deer hunting podcast, but Jay Scott and Dusty Phillips, they're the hosts of the show, and they do a great job with the podcast. They have great personalities. They're it's very enjoyable to listen to them on the podcast, and they interview a lot of great guests, a lot of knowledgeable guests about pretty much every aspect of deer hunting you can think of. Everything on, stories of how guys or gals took particular big bucks, and they break down those hunts and, have the hunter go over in detail kind of what worked for them on that hunt. And they interview wildlife biologists and, hunting industry celebrities, and they do a great job with their podcast. It's very enjoyable. I find it to be very knowledgeable. You can certainly pick up some things in that podcast that will help you out, and it's also just a very entertaining podcast to listen to. So for anybody who hasn't done so, I would certainly recommend checking out the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast, and I'll be also leaving a link to that podcast in the show notes. Okay, guys, and another podcast that I wanted to point out for you guys. Again, it's one that I enjoy listening to. It's another traditional archery-related podcast, and that's the podcast from the Trad Geeks. And for anybody who listens to that podcast, you already know what I'm talking about. It's a great podcast. And for anybody who hasn't checked it out, I would certainly recommend checking out the Trad Geeks podcast. They've had some great guests on their show already, and they also do a good job at pointing out some tips and strategies and things that work for them in their traditional bow hunting. So if you haven't yet, check out the Trad Geeks podcast. I will also be leaving a link to that in the show notes here as well. Okay, guys, in the last podcast that I wanted to point out for you guys this evening, and it's my personal favorite podcast to listen to. I pretty much will not miss a week. I find the podcast to be just incredibly informative, and I've learned so much, myself over the last, year and a half listening to the podcast, and that's the Wired to Hunt podcast. It's hosted by Mark Kenyon over at Wired to Hunt, and his co-host is Dan Johnson over at the Nine Finger Chronicles. Dan was a guest on our show here a few weeks back. I talked to Dan about his run and gun tree stand tactic setup, and that was a great podcast. I learned a lot from Dan during that. If you guys want to check that out, go back through our previous shows. The exact podcast number escapes my mind right now, but it's a podcast where I interviewed Dan about his run and gun tree stand setup. Great podcast. But the Wired to Hunt podcast is an exceptional podcast. Mark and Dan do an excellent job. They're very good guys to listen to. It's very enjoyable to just listen to them talk about their passion for deer hunting and all of their great tips and stories. And they talk to a lot of very knowledgeable people within the hunting industry. Again, pretty much every topic you can think about, they either have covered it already or they're probably going to be covering it in the future. Just you can get a lot of information from those guys, not only from Mark and Dan, but also the people that they interview. Just an excellent podcast. It airs every Thursday, usually, pretty much every Thursday. They put a new episode out. But again, another podcast that I would think a lot of people I know are listening to that one. It's got great reviews on iTunes. Very well deserved. They do a great job. But anybody who's into deer hunting, you certainly have to check out the Wired to Hunt podcast. Really cannot recommend that one enough, guys. Again, I will be leaving a link in the show notes to how you can check out the Wired to Hunt podcast. Okay, guys, and now I wanted to jump into the meat and potatoes or the main topic that I wanted to discuss on this week's show. And that's, I just wanted to give you guys some of my own personal feedback and some of my own insights of the things that I've learned and picked up while, trying to film my hunts the last several years. For anybody who has filmed their own hunts or who does film their own hunts, you know what I'm talking about when I say it is an extreme challenge, especially if you're a self-filmer, which I primarily am. Filming your own hunt is very hard to do, and there's a big learning curve to it. But I'm going to hopefully cover some things tonight that'll help narrow that learning curve and kind of help get you started in the right direction, especially if it's something that you're just getting into. And I'm going to explain to you guys here a little bit about how I intend to film my hunts this year, having made the switch to traditional bow hunting. Okay, and the first kind of thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to filming your own hunts is I wanted to kind of go over, the different classifications of camera equipment that you can use to film your own hunt. And the first camera type I wanted to talk about was the DSLR cameras, or for anybody who's not familiar with the term DSLR, it's pretty much the cameras that you see, the wedding photographers shooting with. It's the single lens reflex, system cameras with the interchangeable lenses. They are great cameras. Most of them now today. In fact, I can't think of one that doesn't offer a video mode. That's a relatively new camera. Pretty much every DSLR or mirrorless camera now today offers a video mode. And don't get me wrong, the video modes and the video capabilities and the photographic capabilities of these cameras are, without question, as far as image quality, probably the best you're going to find. But anybody who films their hunts, especially if you self-film your hunt, there's a lot of multitasking and a lot of coordination that has to go along while doing that, because you're trying to not only hunt but also capture your hunt on film. And the issue that I have with the DSLRs is the fact that they're very difficult to work with from a self-filming standpoint. Because they have so many manual controls, and the focus on them can be just very, very tricky, and I find them very difficult to work with from a self-filming standpoint. So I actually don't use DSLR cameras. I do have a couple DSLR cameras. Nowadays I've got more mirrorless cameras. For example, I've got a Panasonic GH4. And I had an Olympus OMD EM1 that I actually sold recently to a coworker. But I like the mirrorless cameras. Reason why I like the mirrorless cameras is because they're smaller, the lenses are smaller, they're lighter, they're easier to pack into the woods, they're just easier to deal with, and in my opinion, they offer equally as good image quality. In fact, I don't think you could find a DSLR that could beat the video image quality out of that Panasonic GH4. The GH4 just does a stellar job. But even with that said, those kind of cameras, like I said, they're very difficult to work with, and I wouldn't even want to try self-filming a hunt with those. There's just way too much that goes on when you're trying to hunt and kill that animal and do it effectively, and then trying to film. So I use my DSLR cameras if I'm going to be the cameraman, filming somebody else's hunt. That's when I'll go to my DSLR cameras, because they do have that top-notch image quality. But from a self-filming standpoint, I personally would recommend, I'm not saying don't use them, but if you're going to use them, boy, you want to practice with them and really make sure you know that camera inside and out, because when that moment of truth comes and you have to hunt and kill this animal coming in and try to film that as well, I just find it to be very difficult to pull off with the DSLR cameras unless you really know what you're doing and really know that camera and are able to work that camera pretty much without even having to think about it. So the DSLR cameras are great cameras. they're expensive to get, to get into a good one, especially if you're going to be talking about multiple lenses to cover various focal lengths. You can tie up a lot of money into those cameras, but as far as image quality, going to be very hard to beat the DSLR style camera. But they're just a little bit quirky to work with and a little bit tricky to work with from a self-filming standpoint. So that's a little bit of my insights on the DSLR cameras. There pretty much isn't a bad one out there nowadays. They're all good cameras. It really comes down to your own personal preference. I've kind of become a Panasonic man and a Micro Four Thirds mirrorless kind of guy here the last several years. But that's just my own personal preference and personal opinions. I know a lot of guys like the Canons or the Nikons, and you really can't go wrong with one. Great image quality. Going to be very rugged cameras. They're just a little bit difficult to work with, especially from a self-filming standpoint. And you definitely want to make sure that you practice a lot with those cameras and really learn that camera inside and out before you ever take it out on a hunt with you. Okay, and now I wanted to get into the professional camcorder style cameras. And I did own one of those, and I actually sold it to another fellow hunter a couple of years ago, actually. And I had a Sony NX5U, which was a great camera, But again, you're talking about a larger, professional grade camcorder, much bigger, much bulkier, much heavier, than your, prosumer or consumer level camcorder. So with that, of course, it's going to have its benefits and it's going to have its drawbacks. Some of the benefits, obviously, great image quality. Those professional camcorder style cameras have great image quality. They have great sensors, and mine had the ability for XLR audio inputs. So you had great audio capabilities. But a couple of the drawbacks are obviously the size, weight, and ergonomics of dealing with it on a hunt, especially if you're self-filming. And with that camera there, you pretty much had to have either a tripod with you on the hunt if you were ground hunting in a ground blind, say, or you had to have a camera arm if you were tree stand hunting, and you had to pretty much have a really high quality camera arm to deal with those, professional, larger size camcorders. So, you know what? I had that. I took it out on a few hunts. It worked great image quality, but I actually stopped using it. And again, it comes down to that size, weight, bulkiness, and just ergonomic standpoint when you're hunting. I just found it to be such a hassle to carry it into the woods, set it up, have it in there when you're hunting, tear it all down after the hunt. I just found it to become such a hassle to deal with from a self-filming standpoint that I stopped using the camera, which is why I decided to sell it, because I simply wasn't using it. So I wanted to get something for it while it was still worth something. So my personal recommendation would be to use those style of cameras if you are the cameraman, or if you have somebody who can be your cameraman, let them use that camera for you. Just make sure that you take the time to, go over that camera with them or learn it yourself. You have to know one of the biggest factors in filming your own hunts is you have to be able to work that camera or whatever system you have. You have to be able to work that and push the buttons and go and you have to be able to do that pretty much off just muscle memory. You don't want to have a deer coming in and think about making the shot and getting your bow ready and all those things that come into play when the moment of truth comes, and have to think about all the stuff with the camera. The stuff with the camera really has to just come naturally through your instincts, and it comes from knowing that camera very, very well. So that's a generalized tip for any camera system you use. If you're going to hunt with it, make sure you take the time to practice with it. Practice with it in your yard when you're shooting. Just the more time you have working that camera, getting comfortable with it, the easier you're going to find it to be in a hunting scenario, especially a self-filming hunting scenario. So that's really the best piece of advice I can give you guys as far as self-filming your hunts or even being a cameraman is you have got to know your camera gear inside and out before you get out there into the field. But those professional-sized camcorders, they're great, in my opinion, if you're a cameraman or if you have a cameraman. But from a self-filming standpoint, I'm not saying it's impossible to use them, and I know guys that do and do it successfully. But you have to be willing to, put in that extra effort to deal with it, and get it in there and set it all up and take it all down. You have to be willing to ride that out and keep doing it day after day, because the one day you don't bring it, you're going to get a shot opportunity. So that's really the best piece of advice I can give you there. They are great cameras as far as brand preference. Again, when you're talking that class of camera, you're talking about a $2,500 plus camera. You really can't buy a bad one. They're all great cameras. Have great image quality, have great features. Again, it comes down to your personal preference, what you like best, what works best for you, what feels best for you, and maybe, what you've already got. Maybe you already have a Sony brand camera, so you want to buy a Sony brand camera with this professional quality camcorder. So there really is no right or wrong answer as far as, what brand to get. They're all great. Again, it just comes down to personal preference. Okay, guys, and the next kind of camera equipment I want to talk about is I wanted to talk about more of your consumer and prosumer line of video cameras. And these are the small little handy cams. The cameras that fit in your hand. And you know what? These have been my go-to kinds of cameras over the years when it comes to filming my own hunts. And especially the last 4 or 5 years, some of these consumer level and prosumer level camcorders on the market today, I tell you what, if it wasn't for knowing, if you looked at, online samples, or if you had a couple of these cameras yourself and you took some video and did a side-by-side comparison, in a lot of cases, you would be extremely hard-pressed to find a difference in image quality a lot of times between some of these consumer-grade camcorders and prosumer-grade camcorders in comparison to even these professional-level camcorders. I mean, some of these consumer-grade camcorders nowadays have absolutely amazing video quality. And you know what? I mean, that's why I've chosen to go with those cameras, is because there really is no trade-off in image quality. The one thing I will say on that is you probably do run into a little bit more low-light issues. But again, in my opinion, it's not enough of an issue to deal with the big, bulky, professional-grade camcorders over the consumer-grade camcorders. So when you balance everything out, I've pretty much gone to my consumer-grade camcorders because they're literally about a tenth of the size. They weigh a lot less. They'll fit in your fanny pack that you can wear on your waist. You don't have to use a tripod with them to film. Half the time you can film free-handed, even in a tree stand. You can, tuck that back in a fanny pack when you're not using it, so you can even hunt in the rain with it because you can keep it out of the weather, even if it does rain. Whereas with those larger, pro-grade, camcorders, a lot of times you can't keep them out of the rain because they're out on a big camera arm, and they're so big and bulky you couldn't put them inside anything anyways. So the last several years, I've been pretty much sticking exclusively to my small consumer-grade camcorders just because of the ease of use. They're so much more portable, easy to pack into the woods. There's very limited setup with them. You can use a lot smaller camera arm if you want to use a camera arm, or you can just freehand them a lot of times. The tripods you have to use are a lot smaller. There's just so many more benefits, especially from a self-filming standpoint, in my opinion, that I've gone that route the last several years. Now, a couple things I will point out is you're going to want to make sure that you've got at least a couple of spare batteries with you, because most of these consumer-grade camcorders, that is one area where they really do suffer quite a bit more than the more professional-grade camcorders is in battery life. And so you want to make sure you've got a couple of extra batteries on hand to make sure that you can get through, a several-hour hunt or an all-day hunt. And just one tip for anybody out there, one thing you can do, especially when the temperatures get down colder, is I like to actually keep my spare batteries in a pocket, in an interior pocket, closest to my underlayers. This way here, my body heat is able to help keep those extra camera batteries warm, and I can keep swapping them batteries every half hour or every hour and always keep a warm battery on that camera to make sure that I'm going to get, that camera's going to work if it's cold out, because I have ran into an issue actually several times where it's, especially if you're talking, temperatures down in the single digits, a lot of times on those consumer grade camcorders, it's so cold that they won't even turn on if they get too cold. So the one way I found to kind of alleviate that issue is to bring, 2, 3, 4 batteries with you and just keep swapping them out, and keeping a warm one in it every half hour to an hour can really increase the longevity of how long that camera can last in the cold. And also, it's just, in my opinion, it's a needed step to get through a several-hour hunt or an all-day hunt, is you want to make sure you have several extra batteries if you're going to use the consumer-grade camcorders, because even though they, in my opinion, offer pretty much equal image quality in today's market, at least in my opinion, not enough of a difference to deal with the bulkiness of the professional grade larger camcorders. So I've gone to the consumer grade camcorders, but with that being said, you have to pay attention to how many batteries you have on hand, because you can run into power issues if you're out there on a multi-hour, on a several-hour, or an all-day hunt. Okay, guys, and now the last the last camera classification I wanted to touch on, and it's something that we're seeing become a lot more popular, especially as this class of camera becomes more and more advanced every year, and it's actually becoming one of my favorite ways to film my hunts, and that's with action cameras. And when I talk about action cameras, I'm talking about your GoPros, your Drift HDs, the Sony action cams, the cameras that you can mount onto your bow or mount onto your head or your chest, or up in a tree limb over top of your head. The small handheld cameras, the little action cams that that are inside of waterproof housings, so you can hunt in all weather conditions. These cameras are really have advanced a lot the last even couple of years, and they're actually getting to the point now where they're putting out such good image quality that it's kind of like, all right, why do I even want to get a prosumer grade camcorder? Because the image quality of these small action cams now are just getting absolutely amazing. Now, the one thing I do have to mention here is the fact that, in fact, I can't think of one that does, but you pretty much have that you have no options for zooming. That's probably the main downfall of the action cameras, is the fact that you can't zoom in and get close to a subject or to an animal out there. It's pretty much a fixed focal length view from these action cams, and pretty much the only way to zoom in is in post-processing or in editing, where you can actually go into your editing software and you can digitally crop into this image and make it appear as though it's closer than it really is. But that's pretty much the only way you can really zoom in with these action cams. But I mean, a couple of the major benefits with them is the fact that pretty much all of these nowadays have good image quality, excellent image quality, and they've all pretty much got either they'll come weather resistant and waterproof and snowproof, or they'll come with a housing that allows them to be waterproof and weatherproof. So there's no issues with hunting with these things in the rain or the snow. You can pretty much hunt with them in any weather condition. And like I said, they have great image quality, and they're very easy to use. And a couple of pretty much my preferred action camera right now, at least from my experience, has been the GoPro line of cameras. They're a very popular camera, and rightfully so. They have excellent image quality. The performance of the GoPros has always been very top-notch in my opinion. I don't think I've ever had an issue with one of my GoPro cameras not working or breaking. So I've always found them to be very durable, and of course, they come with a waterproof housing, and the battery life is very good too in the GoPros. So I've had good results with the GoPros, so I've kind of stuck with them. They have pretty much been the action cam leader the last several years. Although I have been recently researching online, looking at a lot of comparison videos and sample images and stuff, and I tell you what, the new the new lineup from Sony, their action camera lineup, they've got some awesome action cameras out there as well. A lot of these now, these action cameras, most of them nowadays have Wi-Fi, so you can, mount this camera to your head on a head strap, or to your chest on a chest mount, or wherever on your bow, and you can actually uh, work that camera and, remotely access that camera and start filming and stop filming and change settings remotely through either a wrist remote, or you can even hook it to your cell phone nowadays, so you can remotely access and turn on this camera. So the action cameras are definitely a great option if you want to film your hunt, especially if you're not looking to go on TV, or you're not worried about having TV grade quality footage. If you're the guy that just wants to keep it simple, wants to keep it relatively very light, and only wants to pack in one camera or two, in my opinion, the action cameras are the way to go, because you can hook that to your bow, or you can strap it to your head, and you can pretty much film when the action comes in, when the action's happening, when that deer's coming in, or the turkey, or whatever you're hunting. When the animal comes in, you can turn on your action cam, and you can just forget about everything else. The camera's rolling, it's recording, and you can just focus on making the shot and getting that animal down. So, and that's actually the way I plan on filming most of my hunts this year, is I want to do it primarily with action cameras. And for anybody who follows my YouTube channel, you'll know I've posted a few videos here the last few weeks, practicing doing some sample shooting with my GoPro, attached to my head on a head strap. So I'm practicing with that here this summer to see how it's going to work, and so that I know this fall, I know exactly how that camera is going to work, and it should work for me. So that's how I plan on doing my filming this year on my hunts, is I want to do it with mostly action cameras. And the one other thing I will do is I'm going to probably bring one of my small little consumer camcorders along with me that I can just tuck into my fanny pack. This way here, if I'm going through the woods and I see a deer, a couple 100 yards off, or way off into the woods, and I don't think I'm going to get an opportunity, or the animal's just too far away yet to even worry about getting an opportunity, I can pull out my handy cam and I can zoom in and get some good quality footage of that deer, do it freehand, and if the animal starts coming in my way, like he's going to give me an opportunity, or something changes, I can just turn the camera off real quick, stuff it back in my little fanny pack, turn on my GoPro on my head strap, and then when that animal closes in, I can get the kill shot with my head mounted GoPro. So that's kind of how I want to film my hunts this year. What I was doing when I was a compound shooter, the last couple of years when I was a compound shooter, I was actually attaching my GoPro to my bow, to my compound bow, on a little camera arm, and that worked out well for me. I actually captured a doe kill a few years ago on opening day of our bow season. I killed a doe on video. Did a great job for me, and that worked well. But of course, I've given up the compound bows now, and now that I'm shooting the longbow, even though there is a couple of gadgets out there that will allow you to mount a small action camera to your traditional bow, I'm not going to go that route simply because I don't want to have to deal with the, extra weight on my bow. I just don't want to alter my shooting at all by, introducing this camera onto my bow. So I don't even want to attach anything to my bow, not even a quiver. I'm going to have my quiver on my hip. I don't want nothing on my bow, including the camera. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have my GoPro or my action camera onto my head on a head strap. This way here, when that animal comes in and I'm getting ready to get a shot opportunity, I'm going to be rolling, filming, and with that action camera attached to your head, pretty much anything you're looking at, you're filming. So all you have to worry about is making the shot. And I think that's going to be very important for me, especially now that I'm shooting traditional bows. I don't want to have to think about anything else when the shot opportunity, when I'm getting ready to make that shot. I don't want to have to think about what's this camera doing. It's not fair to me, and most importantly, it's not fair to that animal that I'm shooting at. I realize that shooting traditional bows is a big responsibility, and I do take that very seriously, and I want to make sure that I'm being as proficient as I possibly can in that hunting situation, and hopefully, taking that animal as humanely as possible. And the best way for me to do that is to not have any kind of camera attached to my bow or to a camera arm where I have to, take attention away from picking that spot and, shooting my bow as accurately as possible in that situation. I don't want to have to worry about messing around with any cameras. I do want to film my hunts, yes, but I want to do that with my head-mounted action camera, where once I turn it on, I don't have to think about anything but making that shot. That's just what I think is going to work for me, because I know that shooting the traditional bows now, it's going to take a lot, superior concentration. When that moment of truth happens, I'm going to have to be really dialed in, and I just don't want to have any outside distractions. Like I said, it's not fair to me as a hunter, and most importantly, it's not fair to the deer that I'm shooting at. So that's my thoughts on how I want to film my hunts this year. I'm going to do it with small action cameras attached to my head on a head strap to capture that kill shot, hopefully. And I am going to bring my palm quarter, my little handy cams, bring one of my handy cams with me, and just have that tucked away in a pocket or in my hand muff. And just right here, I can pull it out real quickly, film deer or film whatever's going on out there at a distance when things are, out there, out of shooting range and probably not getting into shooting range. I can still get some good video of these deer when they're out there, off at farther distances. But then when the action's in close and I'm getting ready to make that shot and that opportunity is getting ready to come in, now I can put that small handy cam away, turn on my GoPro on my head mount, and I can hopefully capture the kill shot there. And you know what? I'm sure a lot of you guys have too, but I've been checking out a lot of videos online. And I tell you what, I find the action camera, that point of view action camera, angle, to me it just looks, super cool. I love watching hunts like that online, where you see the hunt and you see the shot from the hunter's perspective. To me, it's almost like you're right there in the tree stand with that guy. It's almost like you're the one in the tree on the hunt. So I think it's a great look. I'm really excited about using that style of filming. I have done it in the past when I was compound hunting, had good results with it. Want to continue doing that with my traditional bows, and hopefully I can take a deer or two this fall on video with the longbow, with the head cam. Of course, if I do that, I'll be putting those videos on the YouTube channel. So hopefully I can add some content later on this season with some hunts. But that's just a little podcast I wanted to do this week, with just some of my thoughts on filming your own hunt. I think the biggest thing is, when it comes to any kind of camera system, don't get tied up into, what brand this guy uses or what brand he uses or what camera this guy uses. Find the camera find the type of camera that's going to work best for you and how you hunt, whether that be if you're a still hunter or if you're a tree stand hunter or a ground blind hunter, whatever. Find the system that you're comfortable with, the cameras that you're good with, that you can become proficient with using while you're hunting. Focus on that. And, just do what works for you is really the best advice I can give for you. And everybody kind of comes up with their own system for how they go about actually filming that hunt. Everybody has their own little quirks and nuances about how they go about filming. Again, there really is no right or wrong answer in this stuff. The best advice I could give anybody would be to practice with it. Practice before you hunt. Pretend you're hunting. Put your 3D deer target out there, and if you have to, get up into your tree stand. If you're going to hunt from tree stands, get up into your tree stand and put that action camera on your head, or put your camera arm out there and practice. Put yourself in these anticipated situations. Hey, this deer's out here at 15 yards, and practice getting the camera on that deer and shooting. So that's the best advice I can give for you, is practice before you don't just grab your cameras, go out there on opening day and think you're going to do a good job at capturing your hunt. If you do that, you're either going to not capture your hunt, or what's worse, you're going to make a bad shot on that animal because you're worried, because you're spending too much time thinking about the camera and not thinking about the hunt. And in my own personal experience, and from what I have seen from other people, from other hunters, is that usually happens when people are inexperienced with working with their camera gear, and they have to put too much thought process into how they're actually going to capture this hunt, as opposed to focusing more on the hunt and just allowing that practice and that muscle memory that has developed to be able to just work that camera efficiently without even having to think about it. And it just kind of happens. So in my opinion, that's how you're going to be most successful at filming your hunts. And I've always said this. I've said this a couple of times to guys who've kind of questioned why I want to, go to the action cam route, especially for capturing that kill shot. And my answer to them has always been the same. If I'm going to try to capture this hunt on video, I would rather have some video footage, even if it was, bad video footage or not the best video footage. I'd rather have that than no video footage. I mean, how many times have you seen hunts online or even on TV sometimes nowadays, but you see this hunt where the guy's got the camera arm out there and everything's going perfectly, and he gets the camera arm adjusted, the camera's on the deer, he draws his bow back, and then the deer takes 2 or 3 steps, and the deer's now out of frame, and he shoots the deer, and it's off camera. Well, again, that can all be alleviated with either a bow-mounted camera or a head-mounted action camera. Yes, it's probably not going to be the best video footage, but it's going to be some video footage. So that's kind of always been my personal standpoint, because I'm not trying to make a TV show here. I'm just trying to capture my hunts on film so that I can share those experiences with my friends, my family, and anybody else who would enjoy watching such things. So that's kind of my input on filming hunts. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. I mean, I have been successful now, several times. I've taken a few deer and a few different turkeys, self-filming. So I have been successful at it. It is a challenge. I will tell you that. Anybody who films, especially if you self-film, anybody who does that consistently knows what I'm talking about. If you haven't done it and you want to get into doing it, I think the best way to do it is to get a camera system that you're comfortable with and practice with that a lot before season and establish that muscle memory working with those cameras so that when the moment of truth comes in, you can spend more time focusing on the shot and the hunt and less time focusing on the cameras. So that's my best input on that, guys. If you have any feedback, Leave me some comments or ask me some questions. You can reach me over at Vantage Point Outdoors on the Facebook page, or you can find us on Twitter at VPO Pros. Leave me some feedback with, maybe what works for you, or, what doesn't work for you. Or if you have any questions for me more specifically on kind of how I do things, you can do that. And I've only got one last reminder for everybody. Again, if you enjoy what we're doing here with the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you could jump on over to iTunes, leave us a quick review in the podcast, rather it be good, bad, or indifferent. We're looking for I'm looking for the feedback on ways that we can improve the podcast. But if you enjoy what we're doing, I'd appreciate it. Leave us a quick review. Like I mentioned before, it's not only a great way for me to get the podcast out to more people, so that hopefully we can start helping more people out, but it's also going to be a great way for me to continue to get great guests here on the show. And hopefully I can bring you some more guest interviews here in the next couple of weeks. But again, I just want to thank everybody who took the time to tune into this week's show. I'm going to see you next week right here on an all-new episode of the TradCast.